ignore
We're just
things.
going to pretend. We're just going to act like, who's that? What's that
Exactly.
noise out there?
In the background. It's either Maisie or Fudge, one or the other.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much for taking the time to come on tonight. You're our second last guest on this series, which has been very successful.
Yeah.
And for me, the fab thing about Zoom is that it's literally a cost-free fundraising event, because we're not.
I think it's super. Such a great idea.
So it's fantastic. And for anybody who wants to listen in and have a bit more in-depth conversation with certain people, it's just been fascinating. So psychotherapist. We know one another a very long time, and
Yes.
I'll just give a tiny background on you, and then I'll let you off to talk about, and also
Okay.
I have questions from people that I'm going to actually ask you for your answers on as well.
Brilliant.
But before I do this, let me go through our own history and your own history. So we know one another probably maybe the best part of 15 years. And
Yeah, it must be, yeah.
Yes, and so you were working for the, I think for the refuge, women's refuge at the
You're
time.
right. You're right. We had a meeting in Bray about domestic violence and shelters and the structure of shelters and how that might work. And I think we were talking about Russia at the time.
That's right.
Yeah.
And tell me, just before we even go on past that, how did you find that whole area, Joanna? It's a very, very stressful area, isn't it?
Well, it's really stressful because it's an on-call role and you genuinely are called. So, you know, it's not like, oh, I'm on call, but I'll be grand, I can do this or that. You know your phone is going to ring. So you're constantly on all the time. For my duration there, I felt like I was switched on 24/7. And as well, you know, women's refuge, the whole system is supposed to be crisis accommodation. So short-term crisis accommodation. It is literally not safe for this woman and her children, as it may be, to stay at home. So they need somewhere to stay for a few days for the crisis to abate. And then many of them, to be honest, go home. But some of them then are going to need support transitioning into another layer of housing. And that's the complication in the system. So even in my time, I could see that the women's refuge system was becoming a default housing situation because we had nowhere to transition women safely to. So families were staying with us for much longer periods of time than the refuge system was initially set up for. So you build relationships, you know, dependency, therapeutic pieces emerge, and somebody could be staying with you for months, not days, and a refuge wasn't set up for that. So yeah, it was really complicated, but a very rewarding role, I have to say. You know, I remained very active, as you know, in the women's sector for years afterwards. I did about 8 years on the board of directors of Women's Aid, you know, after I had finished that job. And I was still do a lot of work for women's rights organizations. So it's something I still am very, very passionate about, but because I think we've still got a huge amount of work to do.
Yes, and also, I suppose because of the lockdown in the last 3 months, I mean, there would seem to be so many ads on radio and TV just to highlight to us all. And actually, I saw something yesterday, which I did not know existed before. It was completely new to me, that if you're at home and you're being battered, I didn't know this was completely new thing to me. It showed a girl on Zoom to one of her friends. And the sign is, if you're being battered, that you put your thumb under your fingers and put your fingers down over your thumb to your friend. So it's a sign that the person in the room behind you who's just about to bash you actually can't see you doing, to say that you're actually in danger.
And that you're not safe where you are at the moment, and to send
realized,
help. Yeah.
No, that was a thing, actually. But the idea for me of women and children being locked into a house with like somebody who's violent to them, absolutely shocks me.
And somebody who's violent or who is using coercive control or, you know, financial or economic abuse, you know, the domestic violence spectrum is so big. And I think, you know, that you're absolutely right, like we're talking about, and I think we will talk about a little bit about, you know, the impact of all of this situation, social distancing, lockdown on children. But I think, you know, we have to give due consideration for the children for whom school wasn't just an important part of their socialization. School was their sanctuary. School was their safe place. Their teacher was their structured, reliable, consistent adult. And school was often where they had their meals, you know, breakfast club, maybe a lunch club, maybe did homework club and got a bit of a tea after school. And all of that is gone. And those children are definitely having a harder time. And our system should be actively preparing for the supports those children are going to need coming back to school. And
Yes.
I don't think we are, but I would hope, I know within individual schools who are aware, look, we're aware of our kids. We know what kids are going to need help. They're working really hard. I've been talking to some of those schools about trying to get ready for the needs of those children coming back to school.
We work, as you know, To Children Would Love work in a Dublin Desh Band 1 school.
Yeah.
And one of the first things that had to happen with lockdown was they were panicking to start moving the food out to some of the homes because the children were so dependent on it. And you kind of think, my God, 2020 Dublin.
Yeah.
And they were looking for volunteers to help them deliver food to so many homes. Like, just, you really don't even think this through unless you're standing looking at it, you know?
Absolutely.
But yeah, no, Tara, I find that whole area of that domestic violence, it's just completely, it wears me down. I think the idea of it's so intimidating. And I did some work in Coolock myself in the lovely refuge there.
Yeah.
And to see children, there was beautiful staff there, but to see the children, you know, and the carers trying to make a warm place for them, you know, when they have just been taken away from the most horrendous situation in the night, or the mother has run with them. And then, as you say, they were there for months and months longer than they should have ever been there.
Yeah, that's it. That's the problem, is that, you know, a refuge is intended to be short-term crisis. It's not built for children to grow up and live and go to school from. That's not what it was intended for, but it is what's happening. And it just, look, it fits in with our problem with homelessness and the crisis that we have at the moment and have had for quite a while.
Yeah.
And I think we will have, you know, we have a huge need in that area.
Yeah. Do you coach every woman that's battered not to go back?
No, I mean, honestly, I wouldn't see that as our role. It is not for us to tell somebody what to do. That's very often been part of the presentation that's brought them to the service. You know, they've had people telling them what to do. It's not for me to say, I'm going to tell you now, here's what you're to do. That's not it. My role is to meet somebody where they're at in that moment and to help them to find space to emotionally exhale and to feel safe, that they've somewhere safe to sleep with their kids, that they and their children will be safe, and to work with them. Every resident in a women's refuge, no matter how long or short their stay is, would be linked with a key worker within the service who's going to say, okay, what are the needs of you and your family? What is the next step? Do you need community welfare support? Do you need housing support? What are the needs here? And go through that. And then every refuge would have an outreach worker who will do their best as well to stay connected if that's wanted. You know, and it has to be that if somebody says, no, I just want to stay here for 48 hours and then I'm going home, we also respect that and say, you know where we are if you need to reach out again.
Okay. Terrible to think that they would have to go back to animals like that. Anyway, not that they're worse than animals, if you ask me, men that are fist to a woman. Anyway, and in that, when you even look at the last situation, which we won't even go into, it's too complicated, with the beautiful 7 sisters that have just come forward.
Amazing women.
Trapped in a tiny space with a savage, you know, like you cannot imagine what was going on. I don't actually know any of the details other than their bravery standing there outside the courthouse the other day. I can't imagine what their life has been like. 40 years of absolute hell, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, really, locking them up is too good. Really, it's too good for them. Anyway, so that's how we met you. I remember actually when I met you, I decided that day that we had a gap at the time in the organization, and we were expanding and we had loads of money at the time, and well, not loads of money, but it was the middle of the Celtic Tiger and charity, finding it easier, and so we wanted to expand, and I really would have wanted you on the team, and we got you on the team eventually. And so that was interesting, your personality and my personality. Joanna, PC.
I just developed, you know, like an internal system of being able to white noise everything going on around me so that I wasn't being compromised. I was going, oh, I am not hearing it.
You didn't want to hear what was coming out of my mouth. But anyway, at the time we were only in Russia at the time. And so I just wanted to briefly touch off that with you, Joanna, the Russian thing, and ask you a question about our Russian children. How with all your expertise in child psychotherapy, how are our Russian children without parents? Because we'll come on to your books in a few minutes, and your parenting, you can talk, and I'm dying to hear about the new book. How are our children in Russia so resilient, considering they have been raised in institutions? Now, I'm always fascinated when I hear Joe Duffian talking to people here from institutions, you know, from Artane and all that, where you have horrendous abuse. And really, we have never come across that ourselves in Russia at all, even though we have kind of really searched for it.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, so many of our children to this very day.
Yeah.
How do you explain that children who've been raised in an institution like that, I often wonder if some of them had been brought here and adopted here, would they have survived as well here? Or how are they so as resilient as they are there, do you think?
I think, you know, that, and, you know, having worked with you for years and gone through all the reports that would have been lying around the office, you know, the really old ones, to get a sense of the journey and trajectory of the charity, a standout line for me, and I actually think it was written by the Dr. Mark Wheeler. And I remember a line that always stood out for me in the report was, as a medic, diagnosing these children with a chronic lack of love. And this was going back to the very early days. And then I remember just that always stayed in my head. And because children emotionally, you know, they'll do so much with so little, like they really will. And really in terms of emotional resilience, because there's a big drive in psychology to look at adverse childhood experiences and measuring people's trauma scores. And actually, I would be really cautious about that, because I actually think you owe it to the child or the adult in front of you to not only capture the trauma that they've had in their life, but look for the resilience factors. And I think that's what To Children with Love has been for so many children in Russia, is that resilience factor. You came with no agenda other than, I can love you. I can give you that, and I can authentically, genuinely, not fake it, I can truly love you. And I can keep coming back at a predictable kind of sequence. I'll come and go, and I will leave my people, my staff, my team, who are thinking like me, working in this system like the charity was. And those children had that little breadcrumb trail of, do you know what, there's another way. Life doesn't have to be like this. There is another way of living, and there is another way of relating, and there is another way of loving and being loved. Because we often overlook that in order for any of us to enjoy life and to enjoy other people, we have to have experienced being enjoyed by other people. So there's no way somebody can find joy and fall in love and even form healthy relationships, because that requires that you enjoy others. You can't do that if you haven't experienced authentically, genuinely being enjoyed. And I think that's what the charity brought in to the orphanages, to the system, was a genuine offer and opportunity for shared joy and a moment of emotional meeting, because trauma by definition is a chronic disruption of connectedness. And actually what To Children with Love brought was connection. And that's how you heal. That's how you repair and recover from a ruptured attachment and from trauma, is by connecting. And I think that's it. I think that's what it is. And we've seen it, like the kids, as we're calling them, you and I are now, you know, adults in their 20s, pushing 30, some of them in their 30s, some of them, and their parents themselves. And maybe for the first time in their own, you know, family of origins story, they've broken that cycle. Their children are not in care for so many of them. And that's massive, because that's breaking a cycle of abandonment and of neglect and of trauma. And so I think they took in enough. They took in enough. Good enough is good enough. It's not perfect. It doesn't undo what's happened. But I always remember as well, and I remember the child's name in my head, but she's a young woman now, so it might not be fair to name her, but I remember finding in the playroom, this would be on one of my early visits, paintings, drawings that she had done. And every drawing was of a house. And that's not unusual. I would have seen this in the women's refuge as well, because children crave stability, and a house, your very shelter, is the essence of stability and security in life. That's true for all of us. But there was a sequence of, and it was her little name, and it was over a period of 18 months. And the house started off grey, black and sideways, and the roof was nearly hanging off it, and there were no windows in her first house. And by the last drawing, it was upright with a roof and a chimney and 4 windows, and the door had a heart on the front, and it was all pink and like a classic little child's drawing of their home. And I thought, well, that's it, isn't it? That there's the journey of repair. She's mapped it out. And I think that's what the charity did, and still does, because those grown-up children are giving back now into the system, as you know, and reaching out and helping each other.
One person in your life, if one person in your life can love you, it doesn't necessarily have to be a parent. If you
No,
have
no.
a strong caregiver or a strong person in your life that is consistently there and teaches you how to love, that means it doesn't replace having a mummy and a daddy under the Christmas
No, it
tree
doesn't.
in the
I mean,
morning.
it's not great, but it might be good enough, because all you
Yeah.
need is, it could be a teacher in school who really believes in you and thinks, God, you're a really good singer, you're really bright, you're really smart, you can do something. And I'm not faking it. I genuinely mean that. It could
Mhm.
be a neighbor who I always knew as a child, if things kick off at home, all I have to do is hop over the wall and Mary next door will let me sleep on the sofa and give me a dinner. That's something that shows me that there is a way out of this, and there is another way that families function and relate to each other, and I can hang on to that, and I can do a lot with that.
No, no, it often fascinates me that, and as I say, when I listen to so many stories here about the institutions being so bad,
Mm,
and yesterday Christine Buckley's
yeah.
beautiful son was on talking about her, her horror life as a small black child in Golden Bridge and all these places. And really, we didn't see any of that horror. To this day, we haven't seen, except we did see children growing up without love. That's exactly as you
Well,
say. That's
absolutely.
exactly
But you know, the difference with our institutions is our institutions were very good at keeping the outside world out and not letting
yeah.
anyone in. And if you do that, then there is no other way. You don't get that glimpse of hope. All you get
Mhm.
is what's around you all day long. That's very difficult to recover from.
Yeah.
I mean, relational trauma is actually the one that's hardest to achieve repair in, because if the people who are supposed to love and care for you are the same people who hurt and frighten and scare you, that means that you can very easily begin to merge those feelings of fear and love and find it very difficult to differentiate between those two. That's very difficult to recover from.
Okay, so after Russia, Joanna, after you left us and decided to go out on your own, uh,
Left.
eventually you left. I mean, you never really left, to be honest. You tried your best to leave, but so no, but you did go out on your own and you set up, I'll let you talk about it. You set up
Yeah.
your own organization when you left us. Just tell me about that.
Yeah, so I mean, you remember it was like everything was crashing around us, and it was just so difficult for charities just to keep their head above water. And really, you know, in the role I was doing for you, it would have been remiss of me not to say, you can't afford me. This
Mm.
charity can't afford this role. In order to survive, we got to cut. And I knew that it wasn't like, you know, if you're leaving a job, it's because you want this other job and to work somewhere else. I was leaving because I think charity sector, and I'd worked in the charity sector at that stage for, you know, 12 or 15 years.
Mhm.
I really felt like actually this wasn't the time. It was time to do something else. And my background was in psychotherapy, primarily working with children, teenagers, parents, pregnancy, perinatal work, all of that. And I just said, yeah, in the height of a recession, that's what I should do. I should go self-employed, start from scratch.
How did
So
that go for you? How did
say
that go for you?
well, you know, it was utterly terrifying, actually, you know, at the beginning. And anyone who's ever set up a business knows that for the first kind of year or two, you're really just trying to stay open. You're just trying to stay in business. That's all you're trying to do. And at the same time, in my business, I'm trying to do really good, consistent, ethical work. And that was the goal. I knew that I really wanted to work with relationships, and I wanted to work with the parent-child relationship. For a long time, I had worked in this way, which is very classic, you know, that a parent will drop their child or teenager off at the door and say, I'll be back in an hour, or wait in the waiting room. I do my
Mhm.
session, I let them go home. And I just began to feel, in not every situation, but in many, it was a little bit like having the radiator on and the window open, that I would say, gosh, you know, I've done tremendous work there. That's fantastic. I've had a real breakthrough. And the next week that child would come back and they'd be in the exact same place. And I'm going, what happened? And it's because a child doesn't exist in and of themselves. They are part of a system. They're part of a family. And actually, I think the parent-child relationship is the greatest catalyst for change, good, bad, and indifferent, in any child's life. So I started a clinic that was set up from the beginning to work dyadically, which is to work with the parent and child. So neither is your primary client, but the relationship. And that's really about attachment strengthening work and trauma repair. And, you know, it was one of those things that, you know, once you start saying, there's a couple of very, you know, unique types of therapy that I was doing. I had trained in the States, I trained in the UK. Not many people were doing it at the time. And once word got out, you know, I was really busy really quickly. I was lucky, you know, it worked, but
Sorry,
it
Joanna.
was work. It just, you know, it was a lot of work.
what kind of trauma are you talking about here now? Parent, so you have a parent and a child. Do you mind me asking you? Like,
No, no.
what are your main trauma? Like, are we talking about abuse? Are we talking about what kind of trauma were you talking
Well,
about?
it would depend. I mean, trauma is quite a subjective thing as well. You know, it could be birth trauma. It could be a family bereavement. It could be living with a parent with chronic illness. And, you know, a child growing up with that. It could be, if it was, you know, because I did private work, obviously families who self-refer, but also I did a lot of work by court order. And if you're coming to me by court order, like the situation is pretty bad, because that's why you're going to someone like me, and the judge has said it must be this work and this must happen. So I did a lot of work with children in the care system, and I would have a really like a strong passion for children who are growing up in care, for children who grow up in our foster care system. I admire immensely people who foster. I think they are next level special people.
Totally agree.
I mean, you know, and I just amazing special people do that work. And I've been privileged to know many of them. And I've seen just, you know, this kids who might sit in front of you and they're 12 years old and they are simultaneously 26 and 2.5. All in one sentence, because their development is all over the place. And my role is to put those pieces back together and scaffold up what was a fragmented system, so that that child can return to the typical healthy developmental path, so they can go on. And my goal is that I just become that nice lady we once went to talk to or play with, and they don't even remember my name. They've gone on and they're living their life. And that's the hope. That's what it's supposed to be about.
Okay, so after this then, you got married.
I did, yeah. Lucky man that he is.
Because I always thought, lucky man that he is, and I had to laugh. I used to enjoy listening to you, people slagging you, saying to you, "How can you be a child psychologist or a child psychotherapist, Joanna, when you have no children yourself?"
I know.
People used to throwing that question at you,
yeah,
and you came back with a smart answer. Well, I was a child. I loved listening. You used to come
yeah.
back with that answer.
This is it, like. But, you know, I think behind that question always was another question that was harder to ask. And I think the real question, when someone says, but how can you do this work? You don't have children. I think it's, do you get how hard this is? Do you understand how difficult this is for me? And do you really relate to my struggle? Because I need to get gotten and feel felt by you so that we have that connection. And empathically, the answer is yes. But in the work, like I'm not there as that child's parent, and I'm not trying to parent that child. I'm very much looking at that through a mental health lens, through, you know, social and emotional development. And that I had years of training and practice in, and hundreds of families and thousands of clinical hours. But yeah, no, you're right. It was something, particularly the media more than families, to be honest, would always say, and do you have kids yourself? Yes.
Yeah. And Joanna, did it change things when she came along? I won't even mention her, but did it change things when she arrived?
Well, I mean, it did. Of course it did.
Of having a child change.
Yeah, well, do you know what it is that I am aware that I work, you know, maybe even harder to stay very much neutral and attuned to this parent-child relationship that I'm working with, because that's not about me. But obviously when you're doing attachment work, what has to happen is your own attachment system gets activated. Okay. And I'm working with the child's attachment system, the parent's attachment system, and managing my own attachment system's activations. It's why people who do my work do years of our own therapy, to make sure that you know yourself from the inside out, so that you're aware of, oh, that's kind of, that might be me, not you. And you're able to do that in the moment. Having a child puts a sprinkle on top, because the truth is, and anyone watching who has children will get this, that the greatest way to discover your own unresolved issues in life is to become a parent. Your kids will bring your stuff screaming to the surface, whether you want to see it or deal with it or not. They're of you. So they're going to trigger things in you. So I actually think, yeah, I mean, I've done less direct clinic work since having my own little one, partly because, you know, she was so little, so she's still only 3, you know, we were breastfeeding for quite a long time. I really didn't want to do a lot of direct trauma work while she was so physically and on me and dependent on me. So I was doing other ways of working, and actually I had moved quite a bit at that stage into training other therapists on how to do this work and supervising their practice. So that degree of remove, and I do just very small bits of direct clinic work myself at the moment.
And you have a great mommy and daddy who were minding her as well, who obviously
amazing. Yeah.
Amazing. Never mind the fact that your mother should be running a bakery in the middle of Paris somewhere because
I know, incredible cook. But you know, she's also an emotional cook. And I actually, this is one of my memories as a child, is that when you'd wake up and you'd smell the house full of baking, you'd know, oh God, don't go into the kitchen. She's not in good form. She's baking that out of her system. So we don't, because I also, like, absolutely, it's a catharsis, and it makes sense because baking is so sensory and it's so nurturing, because you can bake and then you feel better, but then you can give all that food to the people you love and you're nurturing them. So it's a nice cycle. But I was also very privileged to grow up with my grandmother next door. So in those situations, we was like, you know, we would just hop over the wall and go into my granny's for a while, you know, let the baking happen. But yeah, my mother is an incredible baker.
Amazing baker. And funny, my own grandmother was just over the wall, and my own mummy is such a huge, she's the role model in my life. It's funny, really, with a few similarities from that point of view. Just before we go on to the questions that were sent in, I just wanted to pick up on your books. So if you wouldn't mind, Joanna, just tell me about book 1, book 2, and the coming book 3, just before we actually pick on people's questions. So you started 2 years ago, right?
Yeah, so the 3 books will come to market within 2 years. So it's actually, and the books are called 15-minute parenting. And I mean, look, on the surface, I'd love to have created a system that all you have to do is 15 minutes of parenting in a day. I could retire off that. But actually, in my clinical practice, the most common phrase I heard day in, day out from busy working parents was, by the time you negotiate traffic, do the childcare pickup, get some kind of a mostly healthy dinner on the table, you're lucky if you have 15 minutes before it's time to get everyone to bed. What can you do in 15 minutes? And initially I had developed a system within the clinic for all the families I was working with that I called Fridge Notes. And that was on my website. And it was a series of printables, downloadables. The idea being, stick it on your fridge and at a glance, you've got 15 minutes of play that you can do in that window. And what I wanted was that if you only have 15 minutes that you can mindfully, creatively, imaginatively play with your child, that's enough, because it's predictable if you do it every day. And what children want is calm, clear, consistent, predictable responses. If I know that I can anticipate with certainty that you're going to come and meet me at my level, in my world, in my language of play, and I know you're going to do that every day and trust you, I'm less likely within 7 to 10 days of doing this. So give it a go. If anyone's watching this, give it a go. Within 7 to 10 days, your child will be less likely to be pulling out of you and tugging out of you at the end of the day, seeking that connection, because they know, oh, I'll just let her put her bag away or her coat off. I know she's going to come and play with me. We do this every day. And that's what it was. So the first book, this one, is 0 to 7 years, and really focusing on the early childhood attachment cycles, that formation piece, a lot of the 3 stages of developmental play, which is actually where I would start in my work, is doing a play history with families and children, looking at, did your child do sensory, messy, tactile play between infancy and 3 years old? Did they do that small world story play of, you know, the 2 little voices going over and back, and why that is? And did they do role play, not dress up in, you know, the lovely Disney costumes, which is lovely, but it's not dress up, because if you wear, you know, Elsa from Frozen's costume, you're Elsa from Frozen. But actually using a scarf or a shirt or an old handbag, so that my play decides what the prop is rather than the other way around. So that book has all of that, and the linked games and activities. So if you're thinking, gosh, you know, definitely did a lot of that messy play, not so sure if they did that middle play, there's a route in there for how you go back and close that gap. And then the second book is the green one, which is 8 to 12 years. And I actually felt really strongly about writing this as a separate book, because actually in the media, in the world of child psychology, we talk a lot about early childhood, and we talk a lot then about the difficult, challenging teenage years, but we tend to catapult over middle childhood. And that's such a great shame, because so much development happens in middle childhood from a neurological point of view, but also psychological. And, you know, no better than a child who's in that 8 to 12 bracket with their pronounced sense of justice and fairness, usually as it applies to them, to point out to you, actually, you have to let me do that because on a Tuesday at 9:05 a.m. when it was raining, you told my brother he could do that, and they'll hold you to it. So that you see a huge amount of pulling away from parents and towards peers. And it's actually, you know, Debbie, the age group I'm most concerned about in this lockdown is that 8 to 12-year-old age group.
Okay, and Joanna, tell me this, just, I mean, I'm an older mum than you. Do older mums overparent? Do they have to do, like, I mean, I don't mean we didn't use books when I had kids, of course. I mean, I was 20 something, early 20s as I was when I had Sophie first. But like, do older mums overparent?
I think actually parenting has changed hugely, even in one generation. And it's largely because of the ubiquitous nature of the internet, of social media, of constant comparisons in our pocket buzzing away, you know, that we're always aware of what's out there. We're in an age of information overload. And in the midst of that, it's actually really hard to make sense of everything that we're being, you know, you're just overwhelmed to kind of filter through and go, well, what's going to work for me? What makes sense? We also have families who have, you know, increasingly two working parents outside of home, or single parents who are just trying to keep it all together themselves, and actually just finding that they are time poor. The demands to do are huge, and just feeling like no matter what I do, it's just never enough. This whole feeling of never enough, I think, is more pronounced now in parenting than even one generation ago.
I never felt I wasn't giving enough. I mean, I'm not saying that in an arrogant way. It never entered my head that I wasn't giving enough. You know what I mean?
And you weren't awash with like a million different parenting platforms and
no,
parenting influencers online, and everybody putting out their glossy, filtered, lovely images of life fantastic, and you just going, that is not what my life looks
my
and
whole
feels like.
generation of mums around me, could nearly safely say we kind of all thought, when you know, we were all happy out doing what we were. I mean, it's not like I'm not 75, I'm 56.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're making yourself sound really old here,
I have
Debbie.
to ask you these questions because if I don't, people send me in these questions. So
Yeah.
we don't have that much time. So let's keep the answers fairly short, or it goes on too long. So the first question that somebody sent in was, because their children have been locked down for the last 3 months, and they've been telling their little ones to stay away from everybody, no hugging, no groups. Now that their children are being reintroduced back into group play, how do they explain that to little ones that it's all safe again?
Yeah, I hear you. I'm doing that myself. So I actually broke out my little Sylvanian families or whatever little doll's house miniatures you have and played out social distancing, played out how we play, how we relate, going to visit grandparents, you know, and literally I played it out like a social story, and I would strongly recommend that because children learn through communication that's doing rather than saying. I mentioned just briefly there that the middle childhood kids are the ones I'm most worried about. The reality is, with rare exception now, most of our kids will readapt and readjust pretty well. They'll do okay. I think we can anticipate there's going to be a 6 to 8 week behavior regression, emotional regression, as they kind of change is difficult for any of us. So we can anticipate that we might see our 6-year-old suddenly behaving like a 4-year-old. And if that happens, parent them like you would a 4-year-old until they catch themselves up. But younger children under 7, they take their emotional cues and lead from their parents. That's that age when they think we're fantastic. They think we're perfect. We can do no wrong. But our 8 to 12-year-olds actually prioritize peer relationships, and they've been without their peer relationships now it'll be 6 months by the time they get back to school. Have been 3 to 4 months before they're actually meeting up for their socially distant play dates. Those children are showing more signs of anxiety. They're showing more signs of struggle because actually their social engagement system, belief formation, everything that's going on for them in terms of new opportunities to learn and create, they have all been limited because with the best will in the world as parents, we cannot replicate our kids' peer relationships. We can't. And we can do a lot to offset the anxiety by playing with them in a very meaningful, connected way, but we can't do that. So if this ends in the phases as are outlined now and we stay on track, I think most of our kids are going to be okay. If this was to linger beyond 6 months, towards 9 or 12 months, I think actually we're going to have a huge problem with our children's mental health. Teenagers and kids who are 8 to 12 need their peers. So I would say to you, in answer to that question, facilitate it, but not flooding them. Start with 1 or 2 kids they're going to play with and gradually build up. Don't have this huge big meetup in a public park. Here's everybody all at once, because that's a huge amount to process. Let them practice it with 1 kid and start with short, sharp and successful. So you want to aim for 20 to 30 minutes. And that's it. And the next time you're going to do 30, 35, 40 and build it up. But I think it is important that we start exposing our kids to other kids so they can get used to this before school, and teaching them ways that they can play without being all up in their faces. And there's tons of ways to do that. And they can say hello with elbow bumps or toe taps, or they can do little funny handshakes where they're only touching themselves. But actually, you know, let games that involve the voice, you know, shouting over, match and regulate, playing mirrors from a distance, you know, if one of them does something, the other copies, but you can do that socially distant. And there's tons of games in the books that would do that. But I think we might have to just give them a nudge and start prompting them a bit on how to do that play. And then they'll be fine. Let them go.
Okay. So with the littlest ones then, maybe show them, as you said, show them little dolls.
Play it out with the little dolls, but always play out what you want them to do, not what you don't want them to do. Play for success.
Okay. Next question was, if you have a child with developmental, you know, they're slow to develop according to the books, and you're worried about the child. If your sisters and neighbours are saying, he'll be grand, she'll be grand, give them another 6 months. My little one was 5 before she could, you know, ride a bike or talk or whatever. Do you listen? Should you take advice? Should you listen to your gut? Should you go directly for professional help? That was a question somebody sent in.
Okay, so I'm going to do the kind of normalizing of it, because if it's something really significant, if it's something where your child's motor skills or their balance, or they don't seem to be hearing you when you're calling them, then no, you don't wait. You go get their hearing checked. You go and you get them assessed for occupational therapy or physio needs. You go quickly with that. If it's something like, my little kid is struggling to potty train in line with all my friends' kids who all did it by 2 or all did it by some crazy early time, and your little guy is pushing 3 and showing no inclination towards it, I would say to you, sit it out. Wait. You've got to make sure that they're cueing you, that they're ready, first of all. And that would be that there's, you know, bigger gaps between them going to the toilet. They're able to let you know when they've wet or soiled, that you know when they're ready. And then you start it at their age. 3 is fine for that. And a professional isn't going to consult with you about that. Equally, I see a lot of this questions coming up with speech. My little one isn't speaking as much as others, isn't doing this, isn't doing that. And I would say to you as well that children learn to speak at very different paces. We've actually normalized very early development. We've normalized that all children walk at 1 year old. Walking at 1 year old is actually early. It's not uncommon for children to be 16 months old taking their first steps. Okay. But we've normalized 12 months. So we feel, oh my God, they're 15 months. What's going on here? And we think there's something wrong. Equally, we've normalized that they should be, you know, fluent and babbling and, you know, telling us full stories by the age of 2. That's actually very rare. So I would say that, you know, once they're doing some of that babbling, they're trying to get some sound out. But if you are worried, you are the expert on your child, not every other well-intended adult around you. And there is no harm, given the state of our waiting lists, and this lockdown time is only going to have amplified those. Ask your GP to refer you to the early years if they're under 5, or just to the public health system in general. Get on a wait list for speech and language or occupational therapy or psychology or whatever it is. And it could take 18 months easily. At the moment, it could take 18 months.
A private therapist.
If you have the means to do that. But if not, get into the public system and do it early so that when your name comes up, you'll be ready for that appointment. And if not, if everything has sorted itself out, you can say, no, thank you, I no longer need that appointment.
Perfect. Okay, next question. What do we do with our little ones in our privileged world when we're looking at the whole racism story? What are some of the things that should be happening in every home that we're all not doing? What are the things that we should be doing so that it normalizes, you know, every color, every race around us, and that we're not looking at them all in a different way? What are the 10 commandments? Are there 10? Is it all about respect and love? And just before I finish that, I had a magnificent black man on my own chat thing last week, and he was telling me on it, Edward Randolph and his son is the goalkeeper for Ireland, that he had seen a boy playing soccer, and the 14-year-old, and there was people chanting horrible, disgusting, racist slurs, and parents on both sides of the pitch just said nothing, turned away in embarrassment instead of calling.
And that's your
So what
starting point, is right
yeah.
there, is calling it out. And I think, you know, I mean, that's horrific, that example, and that parents would sit around. But what can happen, and I've seen this happen so often, little children are innately curious. They call it like they see it. And you could be out and your little child at the top of their voice goes, look, that lady over there is brown. Why is that lady brown? And as a parent, you just want to kind of go, oh my God, don't say that. And you tend to shut the child down, teaching them they've just said something wrong, but they don't know what and they don't know how. And you just want to get out of the situation mortified. So the other person is intensely uncomfortable as well. When actually what's happened there is really natural. Noticing race is not racism. And children notice race. And the correct answer in that is to say, do you know, you're right, that lady is brown, because some people are brown, some people are black, some people are white. Everybody has a different color skin, just like everybody has a different sized body. And you get your juice and your little bun and you move on. But you don't shut it down. You keep that as an open, honest. I always think if children ask a question, they're ready for an answer. You don't flood them with detail, but you answer the question. If so, why are people different color skin? You might want to say, well, that's just the way people are born. You might want to add in, it's because we all have a different amount of a chemical called melanin in our skin, and that decides what color our skin is. But do you know that the color of somebody's skin says nothing about the type of person they are? Our skin doesn't decide that. And then if you're bringing that out into racism, you want to, with genuine, authentic sadness, and show that and say, do you know, one of the really difficult things in our world is that some people do think that the color of your skin decides the type of person you are and how you should be treated. And that is never okay. And we want to always show kindness, and we want to be inclusive, because everybody is the same regardless of the color of their skin. But don't pretend to be colorblind. I think that's one of the most disingenuous things that we do for anybody involved in that situation, is to go, I don't see color, I just see people. That's ridiculous. Of course you see color, so talk about it, and talk about it honestly.
Joanna, are they addressing it in Irish school? I actually don't know the answer to this at all. Are they addressing racism issues in schools with junior infants? And I don't mean
I don't know. I don't know if it's being I think it's all positively reframed as we talk about inclusion, we talk about kindness, we talk about empathy, we talk about everybody being our friend. That's not the same as dealing with this issue, because when you have a little child who says, and they won't escape this was media saturation, George Floyd's awful death, his murder. And I think you want to condemn that in the clearest possible terms and say, that was terrible. What that police officer did was a terrible crime, and he's going to go to prison for that because he broke the law. It is never okay to kill somebody. And if your child is going, but why was he killed? That some people make very bad choices and decisions, and some people treat people who are a different color skin really badly, and that is never okay. So you do want to talk about it.
Yeah, should every house then should make a conscious effort that when you've got little grandchildren running around, that you have books in the house with brown,
absolutely,
black people, white people, brown superheroes? We should all be making a conscious effort that they're watching Doc McStuffin, who's a fabulous black doctor, and that they're not only watching sanitized Disney white movies.
Absolutely. And you want to make sure that your toys are very inclusive, and not that you do any kind of big announcement going, hey, Susie, look at this dolly, will you play with this one? But it should just be part of children's play kit. They should have dolls of every color. They should have little miniatures of every color. They should have, I mean, there's some beautiful stuff out there. I think, and just at the age my child's at, we're big fans of, Daniel the Tiger. And Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, his whole world of Daniel's Neighborhood. And it is just every kind of inclusion you could think about is in there, in a beautiful, child-friendly, accessible, speaking to children directly way. And it deals with some really complex stuff in there and does it better than any of us parents could. In fact, you watch it and you go, thanks there, Mr. Rogers, that really got me off the hook.
Yeah.
But I think you want to understand that children are really curious and they love to know things and learn things, and they believe that you are the font of all knowledge. And it is okay to say, gosh, that's a really good question. I don't have the answer to that yet. So I think I need to find out, because when I answer you, I want to make sure I'm doing that properly, because then you're also teaching them it's okay not to know everything, and it is okay to say that and go find it out. Because when it comes to complex issues like race or racism, then you really do want to have your game face on and be able to talk that in the right way. So I think we all have to start from a place of saying we know very little actually, and we have to get educated and get informed about this and get out there. There are so many resources. There are so many people who are educating and are talking about how to talk to your children about these things. And that's what you need to do.
Okay. I agree with all of that. And then we're going to have to wrap this up. So I'm going to end on porn. So, let's go
30 seconds on porn. Okay.
Let's go out with a bang, Joanna. The reason I want to bring this up is because I was watching, of course, one of my heroes in this world is Jacinda Ardern, and she's just brought a new program into New Zealand, and it's about it's a really funny ad. I saw it on Facebook, and like there's two big gorgeous sexy naked people turn up on this doorstep of a very ordinary home, and they're completely naked, and the mammy opens the door like in her dressing gown, and she's kind of saying, sorry, you're in the wrong, like, why are you here? And then the young guy is standing behind over his computer, and the idea is that they're there to meet him, but he doesn't connect that what he's watching on his screen all day, every day is really, he's not connecting that they really are human beings. And so they're making a joke of the whole thing that they actually are real. So it's a brilliant campaign, of course, driven by Jacinda Ardern, to tackle the fact that young boys and young girls are learning about sex and learning about relationships through porn on the phone. Yeah. Just your opinion on that, and we'll wrap on that.
Yeah, I mean, they are. That's the truth of it. That is where they go for their sex information and education. And it's just such a shame. I've sat in sessions where teenage girls tell me the idea of body hair or pubic hair is beyond disgusting, and nobody has that because no porn actors have that. And young men who are inhaling as much protein and, you know, supplements as they can because they think their bodies need to look a certain way to be deemed attractive, and these demands they perceive are expected of them. And a huge amount of it is that the developing child and even adolescent brain, the adolescent brain is going through a huge development in terms of the part of the brain that develops really quickly is the pleasure seeking reward drive of do it. And the part of the brain that develops, you know, really slowly for mid to late 20s for most of us, and for some people, let's be honest, their whole life, is the part of their brain that goes, is that really such a good idea? You know, should you maybe think that through before you do it? So teenagers are neurologically wired for risk taking, pleasurable, you know, rewarding behavior. So they're very impulsive, but that blur between fantasy and reality is very, very fine. And actually, you know, we need to look at it not, oh my goodness, our kids are looking at porn for sex education. We need to be looking at it and go, why are our kids going to porn for sex education? Why aren't they coming to us? So I think actually we all have to get really comfortable having uncomfortable conversations with our kids. And that starts with porn. I think that video you're talking about, and if anyone hasn't seen it, go look at it. It's everywhere. Do look. It's fantastic because you could watch that. You could play it with your kid, or you could say it yourself, and there's your in. You can say, God, I just saw this video and it made me laugh, but it also reminded me that we haven't ever really talked about porn, have we? And your child is going to say, no, and we're not going to. The best way to bring that up, by the way, is sitting in the car side by side, because there's no escape and there's also no direct intense eye contact. So, you know, not to kind of get into a mastermind subject matter Q&A about porn. Are you watching it? Do you know what it is? What do you watch? Where do you get your porn from? But actually to, you know, be curious and playful about it and say, you know, of course it's not real. It's all scripted. They're actors. That's not what sex is in real life. Sex is very different. Let me talk to you about what sex is, as well as what sex isn't. And I actually think that don't let the first time you have that conversation using that language be with your teenager. They will see you dying 1,000 deaths and they will exploit that, because that's what teens do. You want to practice that with somebody in your life, or record yourself on your phone if you're parenting alone and play that back and go, how many times did I go, God, oh, what,
Mm-hmm.
until you get a fluency and a comfort with the language, and then you go to them because you want to be supremely confident. But I think we do. I mean, actually, the average age to view porn for the first time is under 12 years old. It's between 9 and 11 years old. And it's not that 9-year-olds are seeking out porn. It's that they get these mobile phones with Holy Communion money or something like that. And, you know, you could be looking at some Disney thing online and a pop-up or something is suggested. You innocently watch it. The little curious brain goes, I don't know what that is. I feel like it's something I'll get in trouble for, so I better not say, but let me watch it again to try and make sense of it. Or an older sibling is careless and leaves, or not so careless, and directs a younger child. But actually our kids are seeing porn before they're teenagers. We need to be talking about sex from as early as possible and growing the conversation up as they grow up. I think you start that conversation when they're 2 and 3 years old, not when they're 12 and 13.
Because the whole thing really about the whole porn thing is like it does lead to no respect, all of these kind of things. Then
well, consent isn't there. You know, you look at the acclaim that, you know, the adaptation of Normal People just had recently on TV, and because that first sex scene that's in it, I mean, I've never seen consent openly negotiated so clearly, so beautifully, without compromising. There was no awkwardness. It was just a beautiful exchange of open, ongoing consent. And actually, that's something you'll never see in porn because everybody's up for it all the time. There's no consent, there's no boundary, there's no negotiation, there's no reading cues that this person might not be interested. They're always interested because that's the nature of the job. So actually talking to your kids about this, watching the TV shows they're watching and being curious and just saying, what do you think about that? Like, how does that affect how you think about it? Actually, let me have this is what I'm thinking. Am I way off the mark here? Your kids are well able to have that conversation, but do please start talking to them about sex, about the facts of life, calling their body parts the correct words from really, really young. And then it's not awkward at 12 or 13 because all you're doing is upgrading the conversation, not starting it.
I did say to my son about 6 months ago, should we have a chat about the birds and the bees? He's 26, and I did actually say to him directly, should we have
Never too late, Debbie.
I might employ you, Joanna, for an hour to maybe sit down and
oh, yeah.
So innocent. He is so innocent. It's not too late.
Oh, of course he is, Debbie. Yeah.
We've gone on way too long. Listen, thank you so much for all of that.
Oh, it was a pleasure.
If anybody hasn't seen your TEDx talk, have a Google of Joanna Fortune on our TEDx, and we're all looking forward to your third book coming out, which is an amazing achievement in 2 years to have 1, 2, and 3.
Thank you.
So thank you. Thanks, Joanna, for all of that, and keep safe, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, talk to you soon. Bye. Bye, everyone.